Most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they're living a story that was never theirs to begin with. We wake up every day reciting a script we didn't write. I'm not ready. I'm not enough. People like me don't get that far. But here's the truth. No one tells you. Your life doesn't change when circumstances shift. Your life changes the moment you challenge the narrative running your life. Right now, you are one decision away from rewriting the story that defines who you are, how you show up, and what you believe is possible. The clock is ticking. The world isn't waiting. And your old narrative isn't just holding you back. It's costing you the future you're meant to live. This is your invitation. Change your narrative, and you change your destiny. The story you tell yourself becomes the life you end up living, because every man carries a narrative that shapes how he walks into the world long before he ever speaks a word. Men rarely admit it, but most of the decisions they make are rooted in a script they inherited. Expectations of being strong, controlled, unshaken, and endlessly capable. When that script goes unquestioned, it becomes a silent prison. A man doesn't break because he's weak. He breaks because he's exhausted from acting out a role that never let him be human. The story you tell yourself determines what you believe you deserve, and this is where the psychology becomes even more powerful. Many men tell themselves they're not enough unless they achieve more, earn more, or outperform the shadows of other men. They don't chase success for fulfillment. They chase it to outrun the fear that they might not matter. When the inner story is built on scarcity, even wins feel like losses. The narrative becomes a loop. If I stop, I fail. If I slow down, I fall behind. And so men don't rest, they self-destruct. The story you tell yourself also influences how you allow others to love you. Women often see the potential, the softness, the depth men hide, but they also feel the emotional walls built from years of internal storytelling. A woman can sense when a man is fighting battles inside himself that he refuses to articulate. She feels the distance created by a narrative telling him he must solve everything alone. From her perspective, the tragedy isn't that he won't open up, it's that he truly believes he can't. The story you tell yourself becomes the lens through which you interpret pressure, failure, love, and identity. And until that story changes, everything else stays the same. Identity isn't found because no man simply stumbles upon who he is. He constructs it through the choices he makes when no one is watching. Men grow up believing identity is something predetermined, defined by family, shaped by culture, reinforced by the expectations placed on their shoulders. But identity isn't a discovery, it's an assembly. It's built in the quiet daily decisions that reveal what a man stands for, what he refuses to compromise, and what he's willing to fight for internally long before he fights externally. Identity isn't found because every man is constantly rewriting himself, even when he pretends he's fixed and unchanging. Men often cling to rigid definitions, provider, protector, achiever, not because these roles define them, but because they provide structure when everything else feels uncertain. Yet this very rigidity can become the cage that keeps them from growth. When men believe they must already be something, they stop allowing themselves to become anything. The truth is, identity isn't about finality. It's about trajectory. A man's sense of self strengthens not when he proves he's finished, but when he embraces that he's still in progress. Identity isn't found because women see the parts men try to hide, and that perspective reveals how identity is always under construction. Women often witness the internal conflict men don't speak aloud, the tension between who they are and who they believe they should be. They feel the uncertainty behind the confidence, the vulnerability behind the control, the softness behind the armor. From their view, a man isn't defined by the mask he wears, but by the layers he's afraid to show. And those layers are formed over time, shaped by the stories he chooses to keep and the ones he finally decides to change. Rewrite the script, because every man walks through life carrying beliefs he didn't choose, yet he lets them define what he thinks he can and cannot do. From childhood, men are taught to swallow emotions, endure silently, and measure their worth through output instead of authenticity. These beliefs settle into the subconscious like invisible rules. Don't be vulnerable, don't fail, don't show fear. And without realizing it, many men spend their lives obeying a script that keeps them from becoming who they actually are. Limiting beliefs don't shout, they whisper, but those whispers become chains. Rewrite the script because the stories men repeat internally become the barriers they accept externally. A man who believes he isn't worthy of respect tolerates disrespect. A man who believes he isn't enough overcompensates until he burns out. A man who believes he must always be strong refuses to ask for help until everything starts collapsing. These beliefs feel like truth, but they're only unchallenged assumptions carried for so long that they look permanent. When a man replaces the belief I must earn my value with the truth I already have value, his entire posture toward life changes. Not because the world around him shifts, but because the world inside him finally does. Rewrite the script because women often see the impact of a man's beliefs long before he does, and their perspective reveals the urgency of transformation. Women notice when a man holds himself back, when he doubts his abilities, when he withdraws out of fear rather than disinterest. They can feel the walls he built for protection, even when those walls push them away. From their vantage point, the tragedy is never that a man is limited. It's that he limits himself. And yet they also see his potential more clearly than he can see his own. They witness the moments where a single shift in belief could unlock the parts of him he's been suppressing for years. Your environment echoes your narrative because the people around a man often reinforce the story he already believes about himself, whether that story lifts him or limits him. A man who surrounds himself with voices rooted in fear, cynicism, or insecurity will naturally shrink to match their tone. He begins to mirror the language he hears most often. Be realistic, don't risk too much, stay in your lane. Without noticing, he internalizes their doubts as his own. The environment doesn't just influence him, it gradually becomes the script he performs. Your environment echoes your narrative because men often underestimate how deeply they absorb the expectations of other men. Many men grow up in circles where vulnerability is mocked, ambition is questioned, and emotional expression is treated as weakness. These environments silently tell them who they're allowed to be. They learn to suppress the parts of themselves that don't fit the group's standards. And by doing so, they reinforce a narrative that says blend in. Don't stand out, don't open up. But when a man steps into an environment where accountability is healthy, ambition is encouraged, and honesty is valued, the tone of his internal story changes. He begins to expand instead of contract. Your environment echoes your narrative because women often experience the ripple effect of a man's surroundings more clearly than he does, and their perspective reveals what he may not want to admit. Women can tell when his friends drain him, when his work culture hardens him, or when his social circles limit his growth. They notice when he carries the emotional residue of environments that diminish his confidence or discourage his evolution. From their viewpoint, a man doesn't just absorb the energy around him, he becomes it. And they also see how quickly he transforms when he is supported, challenged, and believed in by voices that align with the man he is trying to become. Action is the proof that your new story is real, because a man can rewrite his narrative 1,000 times in his mind, but nothing changes until his behavior aligns with that new identity. Men often hold powerful intentions in their heads, visions of who they want to become, promises they make to themselves, commitments whispered in private, but intentions don't rewrite habits. A man becomes his story only when he steps into it with action that reflects courage instead of fear, responsibility instead of avoidance, and growth instead of comfort. The moment he acts differently, even in the smallest way, he signals to his mind that a new chapter has begun. Action is the proof that your new story is real because men are conditioned to believe that change comes from thinking harder, planning longer, or pushing through with willpower alone. But real psychological transformation doesn't happen in the mind. It happens when the mind witnesses the body doing something unfamiliar. When a man who once avoided diffy, cult conversations decides to speak honestly, his nervous system begins to adapt. When he starts making decisions based on values rather than approval, his confidence recalibrates. When he stops running from discomfort and chooses discipline, consistency, or integrity, his identity shifts from something imagined to something earned. A man cannot think his way into a new narrative, he must behave his way into it. Action is the proof that your new story is real because women often measure a man's growth not by his words, but by the patterns he's willing to break. From a woman's perspective, declarations of change matter far less than observable shifts. How he communicates, how he shows up, how he handles pressure, how he takes responsibility. She notices when he begins aligning his choices with the future, he says he wants, rather than repeating habits tied to the past, he claims he's left behind. She can feel when his actions reflect genuine evolution, not temporary enthusiasm. She also sees the strength in the effort itself, even when he stumbles, even when he's imperfect, because effort signals that his new story isn't just hopeful talk, it's becoming who he truly intends to be. The future belongs to those who author it. Because no man arrives at a meaningful life by accident. He gets there by choosing the direction of his story instead of waiting for circumstances to decide it for him. Men often grow up believing the future is something they step into, something predetermined by their upbringing, their opportunities, or the expectations placed on them. But the truth is far more empowering. The future bends toward the man who takes ownership of his narrative. A man becomes powerful the moment he realizes he's not living a script written for him. He's writing a script that will outlive him. The future belongs to those who author it because a man's psychology is shaped by the belief that tomorrow must be better than today. And that belief only becomes real when he moves from passive hope to intentional design. Many men operate on autopilot, following routines that numbed them long ago, convincing themselves that stability equals success. But stability without direction is stagnation. When a man stops simply surviving the days and starts architecting them, deciding who he wants to become, what he stands for, what he refuses to carry forward, his future stops being a distant idea and becomes a daily construction. He begins to approach his life with authorship, not inertia. The future belongs to those who author it because women can often see the gaps between a man's potential and his choices, and their perspective reveals truths he may overlook. Women observe the dreams men bury because they fear judgment, the ambitions they silence because they doubt their worth, and the patterns they repeat because they don't believe another path is possible. They notice when he's talking about change but living in cycles, when he's hoping for more but settling for less, when he's aspiring to evolve but anchored to yesterday's version of himself. From their view, the future doesn't slip away from a man. It slowly fades when he refuses to shape it. The future belongs to those who author it because every decision a man makes is a sentence in the story he's crafting, and every habit is a paragraph that reveals where his life is truly heading. When he chooses discipline over distraction, he writes progress. When he chooses courage over comfort, he writes growth. When he chooses purpose over approval, he writes legacy. A man's future is not a mystery waiting to unfold. It is a manuscript waiting for his pen.